In the late 2nd millennium BCE, the eastern Mediterranean was thriving. This was the height of the Late Bronze Age, a period marked by powerful kingdoms, extensive trade routes, and an interconnected international order. The Egyptians, Hittites, Mycenaeans, Babylonians, and cities like Ugarit and Troy exchanged not only goods like copper and tin, vital for bronze production, but also culture, letters, and treaties. Despite being thousands of years ago, the world was surprisingly complex. Diplomats wrote in multiple languages, massive palaces governed over subjects, and merchants shipped luxury goods across the seas. Then, around 1200 BCE, the world suddenly changed. Cities began to burn. Palaces were abandoned or destroyed. Entire scripts, such as the Linear B used in Mycenaean Greece, disappeared. Literacy fell. Trade routes collapsed. By 1150 BCE, nearly every major Bronze Age civilization had either been utterly destroyed or severely weakened. The event was so widespread and simultaneous that historians refer to it as the Bronze Age collapse, and it was one of the most dramatic turning points in ancient history. At the center of this chaos was a mysterious force, the Sea Peoples. We know about them mainly from the inscriptions of Pharaoh Ramses III, who ruled Egypt during this time. His temple at Medinet Habu contains vivid accounts of invasions from a coalition of foreign groups he called the Sea Peoples, and even shows carved scenes of their naval battles. These were not just warriors, but entire communities on the move. The invaders came by both land and sea, bringing wagons, women, and children. They struck with incredible violence, destroying cities and leaving ruins behind. Unlike typical raiders, they seemed to want not just loot, but land. The Hittite Empire, once rivaling Egypt in power, vanished. Cities like Ugarit sent desperate letters asking for help, only to fall silent forever. In Greece, the Mycenaean palace complexes collapsed, and for hundreds of years afterward, the region experienced a dark age, with no writing or monumental architecture. The advanced world of the Bronze Age was gone. Only Egypt survived the onslaught, but barely. Ramses III claimed victory against the Sea Peoples in fierce battles, but even Egypt entered a long decline after these wars. The world that had once thrived on diplomacy and trade was now fragmented and struggling. To this day, the true identity and motivations of the Sea Peoples remain unknown. Were they climate refugees fleeing famine? Victims of earlier wars? Mercenaries turned conquerors? Whatever the truth, their arrival marked the end of an era and the birth of a new, darker age. Who were the Sea Peoples? Despite the catastrophic impact they had on history, the Sea Peoples remain one of the greatest historical enigmas. They left no written records of their own. Everything we know about them comes from the civilizations they attacked, mostly from Egyptian inscriptions, especially those of Pharaoh Ramses II and Ramses III. Egyptian reliefs describe them as a confederation of tribes or peoples, not a single unified nation. In these records, the Sea Peoples are listed with names like Pele Set, Shia-Den, Shekelesh, Lukka, Cheka, and Denyen. But who exactly these people were, and where they came from, is still unknown. Scholars have spent decades trying to decode these names and match them to known ancient populations. Theories about their origins. Aegean region. Many researchers believe the Sea Peoples may have come from the Aegean Sea, including Crete, Mycenaean Greece, or nearby islands, due to their naval capabilities and some similarities in weapons and pottery. The collapse of Mycenaean society may have pushed these groups into migration. Western Anatolia. Others suggest regions like Troy, Lydia, or Lukka, Lycia, in modern-day Turkey. These areas were experiencing internal conflict and pressure around 1200 BCE, which might have triggered large-scale population movements. Southeastern Europe, Balkans. Some link them to migrating tribes from the Danube basin, such as early Illyrians or Thracians, forced southward by droughts or invasions. Climate and famine refugees. A growing theory is that drought, famine, and earthquakes destabilized several regions at once. This may have caused entire communities to abandon their homelands and move south in desperate search of fertile land and food, violently if needed. Mercenaries gone rogue. Some of the Sea Peoples, especially groups like the Shi'aden, had served as mercenaries for Egypt and other states. In chaotic times, they may have turned against their former employers. What's interesting is how the Sea Peoples fought. Egyptian records show they used long swords, round shields, and horned helmets. They traveled in ships with bird-head prows and used organized naval tactics. Some came by land with ox carts, bringing families, tools, and animals. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a migration. Despite Egypt's victories over them, several of these groups settled in the Levant and coastal regions afterward. One of the most well-known groups, the Peleset, are widely believed to be the ancestors of the Philistines, enemies of ancient Israel described in the Bible. But without any written testimony from the Sea Peoples themselves, they remain ghosts in the ruins. They came in waves, left destruction in their path, and then disappeared, blending into the fabric of new societies, changing the course of the ancient world forever. Empires fall, Egypt holds. The Sea Peoples didn't simply raid, they brought total civilizational collapse. Their attacks weren't isolated skirmishes but part of a sweeping wave of destruction across the eastern Mediterranean between 1200 and 1150 BCE. One after another, some of the most advanced empires of the Late Bronze Age crumbled. The fall of the Hittites. The Hittite Empire, centered in Hattusa, modern-day Turkey, was one of Egypt's greatest rivals. Their influence stretched across Anatolia, northern Syria, and parts of Mesopotamia. Around 1190 BCE, their cities began to fall. Hattusa was burned and abandoned. No detailed records survive to explain exactly how or why, but the timing coincides eerily with the Sea Peoples' movements. The once mighty empire simply vanished from history, leaving ruins and scattered populations in its wake. The destruction of Ugarit. In Ugarit, a wealthy port city on the Syrian coast, we have rare, desperate evidence of the collapse in real time. Archaeologists uncovered clay tablets bearing last-minute letters written by the king pleading for military help, possibly to the Hittites or Egyptians. But help never came. Ugarit was burned to the ground. Its archives were buried in ash, freezing a moment of panic in history. Mycenaean Greece goes dark. The Mycenaeans, builders of massive palace complexes like Pylos, Tiryns, and Mycenae, were the dominant force in Greece. By 1100 BCE, nearly all of their cities were abandoned or destroyed. Their writing system, Linear B, vanished for centuries. Pottery production declined. The region entered a dark age that lasted hundreds of years, a world without writing, monumental architecture, or international trade. Egypt, the last defense. Only Egypt stood firm against the onslaught. But even it was badly shaken. Pharaoh Ramses III, who ruled during the height of the invasions, around 1177 BCE, recorded two great battles against the Sea Peoples, one on land and one at sea. His mortuary temple at Medinet Habu contains detailed wall carvings of these conflicts. The sea battle was especially unique. Egyptian ships, outfitted with archers and marines, clashed with the Sea Peoples' fleets in one of the earliest documented naval battles in history. Ramses III described how the enemy was crushed and destroyed, but even in victory, Egypt was never the same again. Resources had been drained. Provinces were lost. Egypt's international influence faded. The pharaoh had won the battle, but the war against history was already lost. A broken world. By the end of this violent wave, the old order of the Late Bronze Age was gone. Trade had collapsed. Great cities lay in ruins. Population shrank. Writing disappeared. Local powers like the Phoenicians, Israelites, and Philistines began to rise in the power vacuum left behind. The Iron Age had begun, born in fire, and disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. Once they had swept across the Mediterranean, toppling kingdoms and burning cities, they seemed to fade into the background of history. They left no inscriptions, no monuments, and no stories of their own, only destruction and questions. Yet their legacy shaped the world in profound ways. The collapse of the Bronze Age world. Before their arrival, the Bronze Age civilizations were intricately connected. Egyptian papyri recorded trade with the Hittites. Mycenaean pottery turned up in Syria. Mesopotamian letters mentioned diplomatic marriages across empires. It was an early form of globalization, but when the Sea Peoples arrived, possibly as both aggressors and desperate migrants, they shattered this interconnected world. Trade routes were broken. Scripts were lost. International alliances vanished. Great cities were left in ruins, and palace bureaucracies that once tracked grain and gold became silent forever. The result wasn't just the fall of a few kingdoms. It was a multi-century regression in many regions. Greece entered a dark age with no writing. The Hittites ceased to exist. Egypt, though still standing, retreated from its imperial ambitions and turned inward. The ancient world, once glittering with power and complexity, became quiet, the seeds of new powers, but the end of one age marked the beginning of another. Out of the ashes, new societies emerged. The Phoenicians, maritime traders of the Levant, filled the power vacuum in the eastern Mediterranean. They spread writing, including the alphabet that would influence Greek and Latin. The Israelites, possibly among displaced Canaanite groups, rose as a small kingdom in the highlands of Judea and Samaria. The Greeks, recovering after centuries of silence, laid the foundations for classical civilization. In a strange twist, the chaos caused by the Sea Peoples may have cleared the way for these new cultures to rise, smaller, more adaptable, and ultimately more lasting. The enduring mystery. To this day, we still don't know exactly who the Sea Peoples were, why they came, or whether they caused the collapse, or were just one symptom of a larger crisis that included droughts, earthquakes, and social unrest. Their names survive only through Egyptian and a few scattered references, but they left a lasting mark. They ended an era, and perhaps the greatest irony of all is this: they may have had no idea they were changing history. They didn't write epic poems or build monuments. They were possibly refugees, warriors, migrants, ordinary people caught in extraordinary upheaval. Yet they became the ghost hands that tipped over the thrones of empires.